1, 2. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, yay! Nice that you got out of bed. You are already the winners, as opposed to the people who are not yet up. I hope you had a good time last night and also the whole of the day. I hope you enjoyed the talks. I definitely did. I was downstairs yesterday, so welcome upstairs. I have a few things before I introduce the first speaker of the day. Don't forget that in the Front Conference app, you can ask questions. If you have questions for the speakers and before you forget them during the talk, you can just put them into the app and we will get to them in the Q&A after the talk. So you can do that. You can practice for this talk already. I'll have a look and see if I can ask your questions to our first speaker of the day, who is Ben Callahan. He lives in Dayton, Ohio, and he is the president at Sparkbox, which is a shop that does responsive web apps for clients and tries to help them to do great UX that is independent of the device that you consume it on. He likes doing things right, I think. I get the impression from his Twitter feed. And when you look at his Instagram, you can see wonderful results of barbecuing. So if you're into barbecuing, you should talk to him later. But he's not going to talk about that. Maybe some will be in there as well. But he's talking about building a human-centered culture in your company and how you keep your employees happy and wanting to work for you and how they can actually create better work if they feel valued and happy at work. So I'm really excited to listen to Ben. So give him a big applause and a warm welcome.
Thank you. So about maybe 9 or 10 years ago, I took a project. It was early in my web career, and I took a project with an organization. It was a nonprofit organization doing some really great work around the world, providing food and water and shelter and some basic needs. And I was really excited about this opportunity because, sometimes you get one of those projects where the work of that customer is something that you really believe in deeply. And so for me, it was really an honor to get the opportunity to try and work alongside this group who I had a lot of respect for. Now, this was an international organization, and as Ava mentioned, I'm based in Dayton, Ohio. All of the folks from this organization, except for maybe 2 or 3, were in other places, other continents. And so for us, there were some very unique challenges. We had a single point of contact that was in Ohio, the state where I live, and so we had that point of communication, that interaction. But most of the folks who would be using this website that we were going to build were all over the world, and actually in very remote places where internet connection was a huge issue. And so performance was a major concern for us. So we had these interesting challenges, and we had a fairly short timeline, just 2 or 3 months, to rebuild, kind of reimagine what this web experience could be for them. And so we jumped in. We were very excited at the opportunity. The team was kind of rallying behind this. And after 2 months or so, we had a really cool product. And we got that into a scenario where our contact in the States could see it, could test it. We had gone through the whole process of discovery and a lot of prototyping along the way, and had great feedback from him the whole duration. So we got this site live, met our timeline, met our budget. It was beautiful. I was really excited. And about a week after it went into production, I got a call from this gentleman. And he said, "Hey, Ben, I finally had an opportunity to show this to the rest of the team." And I thought to myself, wait a second. We've been interacting with you this whole time, and you're telling me that only now, after it's in production, you're showing this to people? Crazy experience for me. He said the feedback from the founders is that the site, it's not really us. And I was literally just silent, Our team was so excited about this work. We had poured our heart and soul into this project. And so I think back about this project often. 1 month after that phone call, for that duration of 1 month or so after that call, every morning when I would come into the office, I'd get my coffee, sit at my desk, and type in their URL just to see, was our site still out there? And about 1 month later, it was gone. And they had replaced it with a default WordPress installation, really huge images, just super slow. I was just very frustrated with that experience. And I tell you this story because I think about this project probably once a week. I look back at this as sort of a really kind of formative experience for me. And what I have come to understand over the last 10 years of kind of dwelling on this failure is that a better framework for a developer, a better JavaScript framework, or a better design tool would not have helped us with that project, right? The work was good. It was a very fast performance site. It was engaging. It was a beautiful experience. The problem was not with the technology. The problem was with the people, right? And so this is a theme that I've had, that I've sort of explored, and we haven't had any other projects that have failed that badly. but any issues that we have in the work that we do tend to, at least for us, in my experience, tend to revolve around the people and not so much around the technologies. So I had that suspicion as sort of a thesis, and I put this out on Twitter using a little Twitter poll. I just said, why have your web projects failed? And I gave people 4 options. Option 1, a developer framework. Option 2, you or your team. Option 3, a design tool. Or option 4, your boss or your stakeholders. And the responses that I got back, now this is certainly not statistically relevant, but about 30 or so folks responded, somewhere around there. And what you see is that 0% of the respondents said chose one of those technical options, right? Every single person who was willing to respond said that it had to do with the people that were involved. So this just sort of confirmed for me what I was already, thinking. And honestly, I think this is true because there are so many people involved in the work that we do, right? We have customers where there's a single individual who we focus on, who's the owner, the stakeholder, all of those. And then we have customers where there's 50 or 60 people just in their UX department. It's like trying to herd cats, it's very difficult. And so we have this wide range of the size of teams that we work with. We have the folks that we work alongside on our team who have different roles, different priorities, different things that they care about. And there's just so many people involved, which gives us so much potential for really great collaboration, but also so much potential for conflict. And so I was having a conversation with one of my employees. He's just super focused on his career, and he's kept asking me questions about, like, what should I be doing? What should I do next? How do I continue to get better? I love that attitude. But I started to realize that the things, like, he's smart, he can go and figure any technical thing out. So I've started to say, I think let's start to talk about communication. Let's talk about how you're interacting with the team and how you're interacting with customers, because I think that's probably the most important thing that he can learn for his career. Now, I'm a little bit of an optimist. So I don't like the idea that we could say our projects are failing because of the people involved. That seems too negative for me. And so I've been trying to think of a more positive spin on the same idea, and I've kind of landed on this idea. If we want to be better at our jobs, we need to be better humans. And so what I'm talking about really is this idea of a human-centered culture. And if I was going to give you sort of a quick explanation of what that is, I think a human-centered culture is a culture that recognizes sort of a simple truth about us as humans, and that is that we don't do things often on our own. In fact, if you look back through historical archaeological digs, right, you don't find individuals just simply living on their own. We always kind of group together. We form a tribe. We form a small city, a town. And all the things that we do together. And that means we have the opportunity to do great work together. And I would sort of suggest that valuable collaboration is the core of a human-centered culture. Now, I say valuable collaboration because I think one of the mistakes that I've made in my career and that I see many organizations making is this, they mistake this idea of getting along for valuable collaboration. And they actually are very different things. So we're going to explore this today. For the Type A folks, I've got a quick agenda for you. I've got some theoretical stuff at the beginning. I'd like to kind of lay out for you the way that I think about collaboration and evaluating the teams that we work with and my team. And then I'm going to talk to you about ways to sort of develop empathy, develop the individuals that you work with. And then I'll give you a few things that hopefully you can take back to work on Monday and put into practice. So let's start with this idea of valuable collaboration and what are the core ingredients that we need to think about here. I thought it might be helpful to use a couple examples from history, some truly tremendous collaborations, the first of which is pictured here. Does anybody know or recognize these two? Nobody's seen this? Anybody? Okay, there's a fan back there. So this is Harry and Lloyd from Dumb and Dumber. It's probably one of the worst movies ever made. Now, it's okay if you haven't seen this. I'll give you a very quick summary. Basically, two complete idiots bumble their way through a road trip, fight over the love of a woman, and somehow manage to survive. That is essentially the entire film wrapped up into a sentence, okay? So if you haven't seen it, you're not missing much. Now, I want to compare this very quickly to another film that you may have seen. Anybody have children? My daughter is obsessed with this movie. I've probably seen this more times than most of you put together. And I love this movie. I think there's some really interesting components to the story. And it's okay if you haven't seen this either. I'll give you a very quick summary. Two very different characters, Moana on the left and Maui on the right, who initially dislike each other because of their differences, eventually realize that they need each other to accomplish something that neither could do on their own. Now this idea that two individuals who start off in the film completely on opposing ends of the spectrum eventually recognize they need each other. This is really common. If you've seen a romantic comedy, right? Generally, the love interests despise each other at the beginning, and over the course of the film, they're forced to go on some journey together, and by the end, they realize they can't live without each other. Same thing for action films, right? There's the lone hero who's off to solve some crazy problem. Oftentimes, that hero has to take along some individual who's dead weight to them, right? And by the end of the film, they realize they actually needed that person. So this is a common theme. Now, it's a little silly, but I'd like to just use these to kind of illustrate a couple points that we can talk about in greater detail, all right? So in the case of Dumb and Dumber, we have Harry and Lloyd who start out as best friends, absolute best friends. They complete each other's sentences, right? Now, they're well suited to each other because they are essentially the exact same person. Over the course of the movie, they fight over the love of a girl. They end up separating, going their separate ways. And when they fail miserably, they realize that they need each other. And by the end of the movie, we are right back where we started, which is that they're best friends and they essentially haven't changed. Now, if we compare that to the movie Moana, at the very beginning, these two hate each other. They have just very different perspectives on how to accomplish the same kinds of problems or how to solve the same kinds of problems. Over the course of the film, they're forced to struggle together, which helps them develop a relationship. And by the end of the film, I would call them respectful collaborators. So I think from these kind of silly examples, we can actually pull some sort of interesting ingredients, okay? So the first of those ingredients is this idea of diversity of perspective. Now, certainly I'm not the first person to recognize this. In fact, if you do any research or any work reading around the idea of collaboration in the workplace, almost every study that you find will tell you that having lots of diverse perspectives, lots of different ideas, helps you to solve problems in very unique ways. It creates that challenge of the way that we think. And so this is a necessary ingredient for a valuable collaboration. And I'm a visual thinker, so I like to kind of lay things out like this. So I'm going to do this a handful of times for us. But I would say you could kind of think about diversity of perspective like this. As the diversity of perspective on your team increases, the potential for valuable collaboration also increases. The thing is that we need these different life experiences, different genders, different ages, different races, different points of view. In fact, we need dissenting points of view. if we all have the same perspective and we're trying to solve a problem, there's not a lot of value in collaboration, right? It's more valuable when we have lots of unique ideas in the mix. Now, the second key ingredient I would suggest is this idea of empathy. And if you remember in Moana, I said how they started out just despising each other, but they were forced to go on a journey together. That process is a little bit painful, but it also helps us to understand where each other sit and where each other, how we approach problems. That's the process that I'm talking about with empathy. So again, to sort of think about it like this, I would suggest it's slightly different. I would say that as the empathy on your team increases, the ease of collaboration increases. So if you think of empathy as your ability to see a situation from someone else's perspective, and you're surrounded by a bunch of people who are also very different than you, then empathy becomes the grease for your collaboration, right? It helps ease that process. So I want to take these two and kind of put them on, very quickly, just put them on a set of quadrants here. So we have these two key ingredients: diversity of perspective, which increases the value of our collaboration, and empathy, which makes it easier to do that collaboration. So diversity of perspective is increasing from left to right, empathy increasing from bottom to top. On the left side, we have what I would just simply consider as like a low value side, right? Because there's not a lot of diversity here, the potential value is low for a collaboration. But on the right side, we have the opposite. Now, it gets a little bit different when you when you start to consider the diversity component here. What I would say, the empathy component. What I would say is that empathy helps you to sort of shift your focus away from the personal differences that you have with an individual and onto a more healthy type of conflict, the conflict of ideas, which is what is one of those necessary ingredients, really. And so if we were to kind of look at each of these quadrants, I would say in the top left, we have what I would call indifference. Here, there's not a lot of conflict, but that's because there's not a lot of diversity. It's okay to be different, but nobody is. In the bottom left, we have conformity. Because there's not a lot of empathy, people strongly question any deviation from the norm. Even if you have a few folks with very different perspectives, you likely don't know it. In the bottom right, this is fear to differ. There are diverse perspectives on this team, but nobody's willing to hear another side. It's not worth sharing your unique perspective because it will simply be shot down. And in the top right, of course, courage to speak. Right? This is where dissenting views are encouraged and resolved in a healthy way. And this is where the best solutions emerge. So I'll pause just a moment for you to look at this and think about you. You know, when you go back to your team, when you go back to your company, where are you going to be operating? Just a moment to look at that and think. Now, I also want to think just very quickly about how we could sort of overlay these two movies that we talked about and kind of see their experience through this. So with Dumb and Dumber, they kind of started in this bottom left quadrant, right? Now, there's not a lot of diversity, there's not a lot of empathy. Over the course of the film, they go through a little bit of struggle together, so they do probably become a little bit closer as friends. Maybe they start to understand each other a little better. So I'll give them just a little bit of a bump in the empathy for that over the whole course of the movie. Now, with Moana, what I didn't tell you about the beginning of that film is that at the very beginning, she's actually on the island with her people, and they're going through sort of a crisis, right? And she's really the only individual in the entire group who has a unique idea on how to approach that problem. So in fact, at the very beginning of that film, she's kind of starts in the same place. Now, very quickly, she's on this journey, and she's kind of introduced to Maui. And these two, obviously, very different ideas. So she's sort of thrust into that bottom right corner. And I mentioned that over the course of the film, they struggle together, right? They're kind of basically stuck on a boat together. And they have to solve some problems. And by the end, respectful collaboration. They understand each other, they respect each other, and they allow both of themselves to contribute in the solution to the problem. We really see that shift from the personal conflict to the conflict of ideas throughout the course of that movie. And then one final thought on this. If we think about how do we move into that top right quadrant, right? The idea where we have that courage to speak. It's okay to have that unique perspective. I think if you consider transitioning to that quadrant from the others, in the bottom right, this idea where there's this fear to differ, this is a very difficult location to maintain. If you don't have the empathy, folks with diverse perspectives are simply going to leave, which moves you very quickly into the bottom left. In this scenario, I would encourage folks to really focus on developing that empathy on their team and on the individuals on their team. Kim mentioned yesterday that organizational change is really just individual change at scale. I love that idea, and all of this starts with every individual. And so helping the individuals on our team to develop that desire for empathy among the team will really help to kind of increase the empathy on the team as a whole. If you can do that, it shifts you up into that top left quadrant, and then it becomes about how do we create more diversity on our teams? How do we get folks interested in working there? And there's a lot of things that we can do. I'd be happy to talk with you more about that after, and I've got a few things to share a little later. But some simple things, looking at the language we use in our job descriptions is a huge deal. Learning how to read a resume, right? Being open to letting folks come in to talk, even if their resume is not perfect. Hiring for your values, right? Not just hiring for culture fit. Essentially, it's about giving people a chance. Now, I mentioned that I would give you this sort of theory, and I think that when you're able to put some of this into practice, you end up with this idea that a team can actually own an idea. I love this. There's so much power in this. When an individual owns an idea, they are ultimately responsible for it succeeding or for it failing. And other folks on the team feel the need to get permission just to contribute. And the opposite of that is when the team owns the idea. Every individual is responsible for its success or its failure, and every person's empowered to contribute. So that's a really good place for us to be operating. Okay, so there's our theory. I'd like to talk a little bit about some ways that we can invest in the folks around us, because this is how we help people to develop that empathy. This is how we create an environment that is inclusive, that's welcoming to everybody. This is how we kind of facilitate that collaboration. And you remember this statement: if we want to be better at our jobs, we need to be better humans. In one sense, it's almost too simple. I think as individuals, we know how to pour into other folks. And so I just want to lay out for you a framework that I've been using to try and think about how we do that in my organization. And I want to talk about 3 different tiers of doing this. So the first is this idea of investing in a skill. If you think about, when you make a hiring decision, when you bring somebody new onto your team, you're bringing them on for a very specific reason. They may be a great designer. And so you're thinking about that individual as this little sliver, really, of their brain, the little sliver that does design. So certainly we want to help them get better at their craft. Then there's a simple idea of investing in them more holistically as a person. This is where we're thinking about not just that little sliver, but also all the other parts that make them a valuable contributor to your team. And then this idea, which maybe pushes things a little further than is normal, but this idea of investing in a life. This is recognizing that there's an entire group of people that this individual interacts with outside of the work environment. And what is the impact to them in the scenario where we're asking them to spend so much of their time with us. So I'll quickly just walk through each of these and give a handful of examples. I want to just give you a quick caveat with this, that I'm going to share some things that we're trying at Sparkbox, not because I want to tell you this is how you should do it, but simply that is the context that I operate out of. So that's my experience, okay? And so one of the things that we're doing to really help individuals develop their skills is encouraging them to write and speak. Writing makes you smarter. Taking the time to formulate your ideas, to put those into words that can convey the meaning, it's incredibly valuable. Even if you're not writing for anybody other than yourself, I would encourage this of you. And the same thing is true of speaking. Teaching somebody means you have to go and do the work to truly understand those concepts. So these things really do develop our skills. Simple things like lunch and learns. I don't know if this is common, but we do this every other week or so at Sparkbox. We've got a little robot in our Slack where we can literally, if somebody hears something cool happening around the office, they can say, ooh, Joe learned how to do this thing, and they can just use this little robot to add it to a list. When lunch and learn time comes around, everybody brings their lunch in, and all of a sudden, Joe may be called on to go up and do a presentation without even knowing that that's going to happen, to just a 5-minute, kind of a lightning talk. And this really helps kind of put people on the spot for the speaking thing, but it also just, it helps spread the knowledge that each of us are kind of gaining independently. And then we do things like a maker series where we invite folks from the industry to come to us. Now you're lucky you have this amazing event right here in your town, but that's not the case in every city, right? And so sometimes it's more cost prohibitive as an organization to send 20 or 30 people to an event. It can be much easier to just invite a speaker to come spend a day with your team. And you'd be surprised at how affordable that can be. So that's a thing that we've started to do fairly regularly now in our office, and it's really been a neat opportunity. It's just a handful of ideas. There are many more that can help you to develop the skills on the folks in your team. So let's talk a little bit about investing in the person. Health and wellness has become sort of this fairly common idea these days. And I think we're finally starting to recognize that we ask a lot of people to do the work that we do. And we want to make sure that their life, their health really is in good shape so that they can actually contribute back. And so, for us, we have a little wellness benefit. And this started with me as an individual. I'll be honest with you, for the first 30 years of my life, I never worked out. I've enjoyed sports, so I've done some things that have maybe kept me active, but I just never went into a gym. Didn't know how to do it, And so I finally recognized this was a thing that I needed to change about myself. And so I found this individual who literally spent about 10 weeks with me in a gym, just helping me understand what the heck I was supposed to be doing in there. And over the course of that time, it became for me sort of what I believe will be a lifelong habit, which is really focusing on what am I eating, how am I sleeping, and how am I getting stronger. And that experience for me became something that I wanted to give every one of our people on our team. And so when our new folks start, they get about a 5-week personal training session with an individual who helps them with all 3 of those things. And then they get a matching budget every year to spend on a membership for a gym or some new weights at home, that kind of thing. It's really important stuff. We introduced this peer review process. This has been a couple of years now. And when we introduced this, I thought for sure that this would be something that was more in that left column, right, where people would be critiquing each other's skill sets. But what we found is that like we talked about at the beginning, the real challenge is with the communication, with the interaction. And so that's what we're seeing with this peer review process. We do this every 6 months. It's very time consuming, and it gives people really a kind of a deep opportunity to critique each other. It helps us thicken our skin. And each time that we do this, we go a little deeper, and we're a little bit more critical. And it's really helped us as individuals to respect each other, and it's put some accountability in place for us to actually improve some of these things. It's been really healthy. And then just at the end of last year, we introduced this idea, a threshold of empathy. It's a simple little program. Literally, I have a Google spreadsheet where I have all of my employees on one side, and then all these tasks across the top, which are things that they don't necessarily get to do very often. So some examples of those things might be sit in on a sales call with with a potential customer, or help write an estimate, or review a contract. And these are all things that, after having done those things for a while now, I was surprised when I learned that a lot of the folks on my team were interested in those things, and they just simply never had the opportunity to participate. And so we've got this little matrix where we keep track, how many folks have had a chance to review a contract. And it's not that I'm expecting them to own that and be the person who reviews all of our contracts, but giving them a glimpse into what it takes to keep an organization moving, right, to interact with a client at all of these different points through their experience with us, that really raises that empathy. It helps them to understand what it takes, to do this work. And it helps them to understand that the decisions they make will have a ripple effect across all the different roles on the team. So it's been really, really neat to see. This third one, investing in a life, I mentioned is maybe not quite as common. A quick example of this, we, like I mentioned, we do a lot of writing and speaking. And oftentimes when we have folks speak at an event, they're required to travel and be away from their families. And when we do that, somebody from our office will reach out to the significant other who's left at home, perhaps with kids, and say, hey, we know that your partner's on the road. We would love to buy you pizza for dinner one night while they're gone, right? This costs us almost nothing to do, but it has probably the greatest impact on our families, you know? It's very simple, and it's just a recognition that we're asking a lot of their partner, and that we do care, and we recognize it can be difficult when someone's gone. So a really simple thing to do, right? We have a simple little vacation bonus where, again, this is geared at the folks sort of in orbit around our employees, but if somebody is willing to give us 1 month notice and take at least 5 days in a row off, we'll add a chunk of money to their paycheck for that vacation. The idea is to encourage them to get away, to take an actual, duration of time off, and it gives us a little notice so we can plan a little better. And that extra money sometimes can just help them stay a couple extra nights, or can cover airfare for their kids to get to a place. And this is just a very simple thing to do. Again, it doesn't cost that much money, but it's super valuable to them. And then, sitting down with our employees' significant others and just getting to know them. We will generally, once a year or so, we'll try to take each employee, my business partner and I and our significant others will take each employee and their significant other out, and we'll just have a really nice dinner together. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about food later, because I think there's a lot of power in food. Now, I want to caution us quickly, right? It's very tempting to look at this list and perhaps take a picture of the screen and take it back to your boss, and say, hey, I got some ideas. But I want to caution you, right? If you were to ask my employees about the culture at Sparkbox, they would probably talk about these things, but I don't believe that these things are our culture. Culture always starts with values. And so if you were to take that list back to your company and implement all of these little examples, it would actually feel very inauthentic to you, right, to your organization. Because these are things that came out of us defining why it is that we do what we do. And so, the idea of lifelong learning, that's something that every one of my team members believes. And so these things make sense for us, right? This process, the business term is operationalizing your values. I hate that word, but that's really what it is, right? It's putting some meat on the bones of the values, of the things that you believe. So that's how you arrive at these things in a way that's authentic for your organization and in a way that's really organic. Now, what I love about this stuff, too, is that it starts to happen sort of even without you doing it, if it's organic. I was in Slack the other day and I saw a little spreadsheet. Somebody posted a link to this little Google spreadsheet, and they had gone through and put all these Saturdays from upcoming weekends, just the date down one side. And this young lady just bought a new house, and so she has a kind of an old messy deck on the back of her house, and she wanted to fix it, but she didn't feel that she could do it on her own. So she said, "Hey, here's all the Saturdays in the upcoming months. I would love some help if anybody can help me come in and help me kind of clean up my deck on this Saturday. And here's a couple other Saturdays where I'm able to help other folks if they have projects around their house." And I was like, I love that. That's beautiful. And that was just an organic thing that happened because people start to understand we need to help each other out, right? Now, I love this stuff because there's a ripple effect, right? Investing in a life is investing in that person. And investing in a person does make them better at their job. It makes them better at the thing that you hired them to do. So there's tremendous value in this for us. And everything that we do, right, we're trying to help folks get into that upper right quadrant. And that's why we do these things, Now, I would say a lot of the things that we just talked about will help develop that empathy and help you to create an environment that's maybe more inclusive and welcoming to lots of folks. But the diversity challenge is really a unique one. And I would say, for me at least, this started, a quick story about how this really kind of started for me. I was reading this book, which is, it's It's about life in this American city in downtown Philadelphia. Alice Goffman was teaching some young black women, tutoring them in school, and she decided to move in downtown with them, and she got to know their families, and she lived there for 6 years with them, and she asked their permission just to tell their stories. And I'm sure that you're aware of some of the challenges we have in the States with police brutality. This has been an issue for us for a long time. It's systematic, it's brutal. And at the time that I was reading this book, I was actually just walking in my neighborhood with my 2 kids. I have 2 little kids, a son and a daughter. Literally, it was like a scene out of a movie. We were holding hands and just walking down the street. I think we were going to get ice cream. And we came up to an intersection and we paused, and a police officer pulled right up next to us. And my son looked up at me and he said, "Dad, look, it's the police." And he waved and smiled. And the police officer leaned over and was like, "Hi, kids," And he went on his way, and we went and got our ice cream. And this moment just kind of lived with me, and I'm reading this book. And there's stories in this book of these young little black boys, 10 years old, that are teaching each other how to run from the police, because that's their perspective on the police, right? And for me, it really was like a shocking experience, because I recognized in that moment that there are so many different perspectives, right? What I see as a protector of my family, others see as somebody who's going to attack, right? Not trustworthy. And that little example, which is very central to my life, there's many others like it, right? For you, I'm sure that there are folks that you see, that you interact with, that you have a very unique perspective about. And so this experience for me really kind of shook me to my core, and it pushed me down this road of starting to understand why is it that I think the way that I do, right? What are other people experiencing? And that led me to these free tests, which anybody can take. Harvard has put this out. If you just Google implicit bias test, you'll find this. And has anybody done these? Okay, a handful of folks. If you have 20 minutes, I would encourage you to go do this, right? You can pick from any number of these little tests. And I thought, when I started this, I thought, there's no way they can possibly design a test that I can't trick. And I thought for sure I would be able to answer the questions appropriately, and that it would, that I could kind of fake my way through it. But that's not, you have to do it to understand, but that's not how this works. So spend 20 minutes and do this. What this will do for you is it will help you to understand that you, every one of us, has biases internally, right? Things that we don't even know exist, that have formed because of who we are, because of how we've been raised, because of a lot of different things. But it really just challenges you to think about somebody else's perspective, and this will really helps to kind of focus in on this idea of empathy. So these are the 2 things that really kind of kick-started me on this journey. But like we mentioned, this is an individual thing. It has to happen to every individual. And so things that you can do to try and encourage folks to take these kinds of tests, to do some of this work, to do this reading, that's really that's kind of what's needed. So a handful of things to kind of close with, some ideas on things that you can take back, right, as you go back to the office or back to work. If you happen to be somebody who helps with interviewing or is a hiring, somebody who contributes to the hiring decisions in your organization, I would encourage you to think about this. Hire the whole person, right? You're not just it's impossible for you to just hire that little sliver of a designer, that little sliver of a developer. That's not how it works. The work part of a person is indivisible from the other parts of that person. It's kind of a pain in the butt because we bring a lot of baggage with us, right? But that baggage is what helps us have a very unique perspective. And so we don't want to throw that away. We want to encourage folks in all of their interests, and we want to help them develop holistically. It doesn't apply just to the hiring process, right? I mentioned food before. I think there's something really powerful about food. You can sit down with somebody over a meal and almost immediately have more heartfelt conversation than if you're simply standing together and chatting around maybe a water cooler at work, right? So mealtime in your organization is actually it's like a canary for your culture. If people if people choose to spend that meal time together in the 1 hour where they can actually get away from everybody, that's a healthy sign that they actually want to be with the other people on the team. So I would encourage you, drop off a meal when someone on your team's traveling to their family, right? Offer to take somebody to lunch. Spend some time to get to know them as a human, and that will really help you to increase the quality of the work that you generate together. In terms of increasing diversity on your teams, Leslie Miley spoke at Tech Inclusion last year, and he said this in a very short presentation. It's really worth watching if you have a few moments. But he said, when you go to cities that have diverse populations, you can hire people who are diverse because that's who is in their community. And then those people will come back to your headquarters and hire people who look like them because that's who's in their networks. And it's very deceptively simple, but investing in groups that are already doing amazing work in this way is a tremendous way to help just to get to know people that have unique perspectives. So there's lots of ways to do this. I think about how, I don't know what the scene is like here in Zurich, but there's so many little meetups that happen in my hometown where all the people who write JavaScript will say, let's have a meetup, and they'll get together and they'll just go deep on JavaScript. That's great. A lot of times people's first intent is, let's create a new meetup. And a lot of times I think they might be better off to say, who's already doing this? Who's already talking about this subject? And how can we invest in them? How can we help them do that in a better way? So a simple thing that we could maybe try. I would encourage you to expose disagreement in your organization. Don't hide it. Many organizations fear disagreement, right? They see it as an unhealthy culture, when in fact, if you want to have that valuable collaboration, you have to have this. My business partner and I model this. We're very different guys, and we have a lot of different unique perspectives, and so we are pretty comfortable openly discussing, arguing even sometimes, around an idea, and we have the ability to get to sort of a good decision very quickly because we do that. And we try to model that for the team. I think it's a really healthy way to demonstrate what's important and how we sort of work through challenges together. I would encourage you to find ways to draw people out. There are some people on your team who are just simply not as outspoken as you, right? And it's not their job to cut you off and share their ideas. It's your job to draw them into the conversation. We have a little channel in our Slack that's just called Awesomeness. And basically, anytime somebody does something awesome, someone else will throw a little note in there and say, hey, Sarah wrote this awesome code. It was really great. It really helped us on this project. Simple thing to do. I've started to use that as an opportunity to encourage the kind of behaviors that I want. So when I see somebody speak up in a meeting who doesn't typically share their opinion, that's what I will put in the Awesomeness channel. Oh man, Casey shared her thoughts on this, and it kind of challenged us to think about the problem a little differently. That's a great example, right? So finding a way to reward people when they step out and do this stuff. And then, look inside, right? Perhaps it's your voice that's overpowering somebody else's. And that means maybe we need to speak a little less and listen a little more. I'll leave you with a simple thought, which is that our greatest threat to valuable collaboration is our lack of diversity. If we can realize that losing our egos and allowing our teams to own an idea will produce better work, then we'll be well on our way to more successful collaborations. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That was super interesting. Any questions from you people? Here we go. We have time maybe for 3 questions, I guess.
Very small question. You showed these graphs in the beginning where you said more diversity gets better work, right? I think it might go down with more diversity, actually.
Okay.
If I have is there a thing like too much diversity?
Is there such a thing? I don't know. I was just working on a little article that kind of describes some of these ideas, and somebody on my team said to me, so does this mean that if if we have an idea or a solution that's generated without a lot of diverse perspectives, does that mean it's less valuable? It's maybe a similar kind of question. I think it's easy for us, especially when we're in the majority, to question whether or not the solutions will be better with people who are different than us. And I would say, yeah, I think they will be. I don't know if I would agree with you that there's such a thing as too much. I think the more unique types of ideas that we can put into the pot to mix up, the more we're going to challenge the status quo, the more we're going to find solutions that other groups would just simply not find. Happy to talk a little bit more about it after, though. Yeah.
Any more questions in the room?
Thanks a lot for the talk.
My pleasure.
I also want to go into the diversity direction. I mean, you said that the two dimensions, you mentioned that quite prominently, diversity and empathy. What are you doing in your team to ensure diversity?
Yeah.
Do you have a very diverse team currently?
We're working on it. You know, we're definitely improving, and that's as best as I think anybody can say at this point, right? For us, this has been a journey over the last probably 3 years, and that's about a third of our existence. So we had 6 years of really not thinking about this that we're trying to repair. Things that we're doing, we run an apprenticeship program where we focus on getting diverse candidates into our office, right? That's a way that we can at least get folks who are more junior involved with different perspectives. We are actively trying to hire more senior people as well. I mentioned that presentation by Leslie Miley at Tech Inclusion last year. That idea has been something that we've been experimenting with now for the last probably 2 years, which is just investing in groups that are around us. So there's in Cincinnati, which is about an hour from where I live, there's a group it's a national group, but it's headquartered right there next to us. It's called Blacks in Technology, and it's about helping Black folks get more involved in the work, you know. And so for us, that's a group that we're investing in. We're just helping them do things, whatever we can do, you know. And so I think it's things like that, and it's for us, it's going to be a long journey, you know. I've seen some organizations talk about saying, you know, maybe that they could start with picking one little slice, you know, and all these things, you know, gender and race and all these different ways that we can sort of get at kind of breaking the population up into groups. In the end, the goal is not that we have, you know, a perfectly divided little pie of every group, right? The idea is that we have a lot of unique perspectives. Right now, I think it's easy for us to look at those types of groups and say, okay, it happens that if you're a woman in technology and you're a man in technology, then you have all these different experiences, right? And so that's an easy way for us to look at a group and say, if I can increase the amount of trans people or the amount of women or whatever group on my team, that will also increase the perspective diversity. But eventually what we really want is just lots of perspectives. But we have some real problems to address right now. So those are the things that we can focus on. Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. I have a couple of questions from our app as well, and there are two questions that are actually related to each other. Like one is around how to break the chain that you fear to be different, and also linked to that is the fear to be criticized. Mm-hmm. Do you have any tips of how to do the first step to break out of this cycle? The kinds of things that we've tried that have been successful have been you know, leadership, very specifically asking for that kind of behavior and standing up for folks when they're willing to take that step and share an idea that might be different. For me, it's also been about sitting down with every individual on our team, you know, one-on-one, and just having a conversation about this with them, sharing at least what my journey has been like. And this is not a thing that you can force on somebody, right? They have to be willing to do the work, and there's a lot of work to do. And so, you know, like I mentioned, I'm still early in understanding all of these things, you know. I have a long way to go. And I think that little one-on-one interaction is very powerful. And you know, sitting down with somebody who, you know, maybe feels threatened by some of these ideas and saying, hey, you know what, like, this is not actually about you. So relax a little bit and try to help, you know, recognize that we need to lift others' voices. That's been really helpful. Fantastic. Thank you so much for your talk and
My
for
pleasure.
the answers to the questions.
My pleasure.
Great.
I'll be around. Thank you.